They didn't show up. When my name was called at graduation, I walked the stage alone, clutching the diploma I had bled for, only to find two empty chairs where my family should have been. That's when I learned what I truly meant to them. My name is Antoinette Graves, and this is how everything began. The heavy oak doors groaned shut behind me, sealing the room with a sound that echoed like a verdict. Every step I took reverberated against the stone floor, pulling me deeper into a chamber where silence pressed as heavy as the marble columns. Light from the high ceiling fell in sharp angles, carving shadows across the rows of benches lined up as if awaiting a ceremony. At the very front, my father adjusted his tie with the practiced air of a man who believed appearances could bend reality. My mother sat rigid beside him, her painted face perfectly composed, lips pressed so tight they looked as though they might crack. And next to them was Michael, leaning close, whispering something that made both of them nod with cool assurance. They looked like the embodiment of wealth and power, ready to stage another performance before an audience that had never glimpsed the truth. They hadn't seen me yet, not really. To them, I was still a shadow somewhere at the back of the room, too small to matter. They couldn't imagine that here, under these lights. It was their masks that were about to slip. When the clerk read the case aloud, their attorney rose first, smooth and confident, rehearsed in his poise. But I rose as well. The sharp cadence of my shoes cut through the hush like a drumbeat. I moved down the aisle with deliberate calm, my leather case striking the defense table with a solid thud. Drawing a breath, I lifted my head and spoke with steady clarity. "Counsel for the defendant, Antoinette Graves." The room froze. My mother's eyes widened, mascara trembling. My father's jaw clenched. Michael turned to stare, as if the ghost of the sister he had long forgotten had just walked into the light. And in that instant, I knew. The real battle had only just begun. I used to wish I could remember my childhood with warmth, but what comes back are only fractures and bruises you can't see. In the big house outside Denver, every story, every proud glance, was reserved for Michael. He was the golden child, the one bathed in light, the night of my high school graduation. I walked across the stage with my heart pounding, searching the crowd for familiar faces. The row-marked Graves family sat empty. My smile wavered, but I forced it back as I shook the principal's hand, diploma clutched tight in my palm. By the time my parents finally arrived near the end, they brushed it off with a breezy excuse, traffic. That evening, I held on to a fragile hope that maybe there would be a dinner, some moment just for me. But as I sat at the table, my father raised his glass, not for me, but for Michael. "We have wonderful news. Michael will be going to Europe before college. An early gift." My mother clapped. My brother beamed, and I sat frozen, fork trembling in my hand. That was the night I understood. Nothing I did would ever be enough. My victories were shadows, his were headlines. In the days that followed, my mother's whispers burned into me. "Just act normal, Antoinette." To her, I was always too much, too direct, too restless, too different. Every word boxed me tighter into a space I didn't fit, a reminder that in my own home, I was never allowed to simply be. It happened on an ordinary evening. I was hunched over a stack of military brochures, studying requirements, weighing a path that felt like my only way out. My father stormed in, snatching the papers from my hands. "The Army? Who do you think you are?" His voice cut like glass. My mother burst into tears, not from fear for me, but from dread of neighborhood gossip. I steadied my breath, looked him in the eye, and said, slow and deliberate, "I've enlisted. 6 weeks from now, I leave for training." The room erupted. My father shouted, face red with fury. "You've disgraced this family!" He dragged a suitcase out, stuffed in a few clothes, and hurled it onto the porch. My mother stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed like a sentence passed. At 19, I stood alone in the dark with nothing but a small suitcase. The night was cold. but the rejection burned hotter than the chill in the air. Then, a car pulled up. Dignified and calm, Aunt Margaret stepped out. She placed a worn fountain pen into my hand, her grip firm around mine. "Antoinette, you don't need their approval. Live with integrity. Use this pen only to sign for things that matter. One day, you'll understand." I walked away without looking back. Denver's night was sharp and unforgiving, but inside me, a fire caught that nothing could extinguish. The civil trial opened with a confidence so thick it practically gleamed off my parents' skin. They sat in the front row, Harold leaning back with the easy arrogance of a man convinced the system bent for him, Beatrice composed in her immaculate dress, her chin lifted like royalty surveying loyal subjects. Their attorney, dressed in a flawless Italian suit, carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never been told no, his voice smooth and calculated as he addressed the court. He spoke as if the outcome were already sealed, as if wealth and posture alone could purchase truth. I waited. When his practiced cadence faded, I stood. The measured strike of my shoes cracked against the floor, each step deliberate, each echo slicing the hush in the courtroom. My case thudded onto the opposite table, the latch snapping open with a decisive click. Pages slid out, hard evidence laid bare, forged contracts, altered tax records, sworn statements from tenants they had threatened into silence. My father's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as if the words were iron shackles. My mother's lips trembled, though she pressed them tighter, mascaraed lashes fluttering as though to deny her fear. Even Michael leaned toward them, whispering, his voice sharp but unsteady. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in their eyes. When the judge nodded and admitted the evidence, I caught my mother's glance toward my father, panic flashing across her polished mask. Their fortress of pride had cracked. That evening, they came to my hotel. My father's voice was low, venomous. "You've shamed us. Blood doesn't betray blood." My mother leaned in, her tone sweet as poison. "Win today if you like, but you don't know the real game." Later that night, a knock pulled me from my thoughts. An old man stood at my door, his hands trembling as he held out a sealed envelope. "Margaret told me to keep this safe until the time was right." Alone under the lamp, I unfolded my grandfather's letter. The ink wavered, but the words cut sharp. "If you're reading this, know that I never trusted Harold. There's a darkness in him. If the truth is ever buried, look to what they fear most, losing money." The final line trailed off mid-sentence. "Their nature is darker than you imagine." My breath caught. A chill settled deep in my bones. I held the letter through the long hours of night, the paper softening under my grip as if it carried heat of its own. Every line pounded in my head, dragging me back to images I had buried. My grandfather in the garden, earth caked beneath his nails, shoulders broad and steady as he tended his plants. The day he collapsed, my parents claimed it was his heart. They stood at his bedside, stone-faced, my mother's eyes dry as glass. The letter forced open doors I'd long closed. Arguments between him and my father resurfaced, shouting over property, over who would control the family holdings. I was 16 when he once pulled me aside, voice low and firm. "Antoinette, if I'm gone one day, don't let this family's honor die with me." Now, 20 years later, those words roared back like a command. The trial I thought was about tenants and taxes was nothing but a prelude. My grandfather's so-called natural death might have been something far more sinister. I returned to the certificate of death, running my fingers over the signature. It shook differently than any other sample of the doctor's hand. It didn't look like an old man's weakness. It looked forced. A single, terrifying question struck me like ice. Had my parents murdered their own father to protect their empire? The answer, I feared, was already written between the lines. I began tracing the unanswered questions in my grandfather's death, following the faint trail left behind in his unfinished letter. My search led me into the archives, a dim, stale room stacked with files yellowed by time. Hours slipped away as I sifted through brittle pages until I found the death certificate. It was folded carelessly, ink smeared across one corner. The signature at the bottom didn't match the confident hand I saw on other documents. It shook, uneven, almost as if written under duress. I drove to the suburbs to confront the man who had signed it. He was in his 70s now, his hands frail, his eyes weary. When he saw me standing in uniform at his door, the color drained from his face. I laid the certificate on his table and asked, steady and clear, "Doctor, is there anything in this report you'd like to amend?" He broke. His shoulders shook, tears spilling as he confessed, "Your father paid me. He said if I refused, I'd lose my license. I signed. I closed my eyes." From a drawer, he produced an envelope so old the paper had browned. Inside was the original toxicology report. Across the page in stark black letters, "Dioxin levels, lethal." My breath caught. Dioxin, derived from foxglove. Back in my hotel room, I called a neighbor who had lived beside my grandfather. She remembered clearly. That summer, the garden bloomed with foxglove. Beatrice always bragged about it. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. My grandfather hadn't simply collapsed. His death had been orchestrated, and the hand that cultivated the poison belonged to my own mother. I knew then I couldn't move forward alone. I went to Michael. He opened the door with fury written across his face. "What do you want? Haven't you done enough? Embarrassing them in court wasn't enough for you?" I didn't argue. I placed a folder on the table, bank statements drained of funds, mortgage papers, near foreclosure notices. Michael flipped through them, his hands trembling. For the first time, the golden image he'd been fed his whole life began to crumble. "All of it was a lie?" he whispered. I nodded. "Michael, they killed grandfather, not out of hate, but desperation, for money." He shot to his feet. "Stop it, that's insane." Yet his voice cracked, betraying the doubt that gnawed at him. I left a small USB behind, recordings of the doctor's confession and the toxicology report. That night, I lay awake in silence, waiting. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. His voice was barely audible, shaken. "I found something. Meet me." In a deserted parking lot, he pulled a worn, leather-bound notebook from his coat. His hands shook as he opened it. The first pages were innocent, gardening notes, fertilizer, sunlight. But then the writing shifted, smaller, meticulous, chillingly clinical, precise steps for extracting poison from foxglove. Dosages calculated for a man of my grandfather's age and weight. On the last page, the date of his death. One line, deliberate and cold. "Mission accomplished. We can begin again." I stared at the familiar loops of my mother's hand, a wave of nausea rising. Every doubt, every fragile hope that maybe I was wrong, died in that moment. My parents were not merely greedy. They were murderers. They fell in handcuffs under crystal chandeliers. At the gala in downtown Denver, champagne still fizzed in glasses when the police pushed through the crowd. Gasps rippled as my parents, Harold and Beatrice Graves, were pulled from the center of the ballroom. The metallic snap of cuffs echoed louder than any toast, shattering the illusion of grandeur they had polished for decades. From across the room, I watched. There was no triumph in me, only the weight of inevitability pressing down. The courtroom swelled weeks later, every seat filled, whispers running like electricity through the gallery. The district attorney rose first, his voice ringing with authority. "We will prove that James Graves did not die of natural causes, but of a murder fueled by greed." When my name was called, I took the stand. My testimony was precise, deliberate, each fact delivered like a blade. The doctor's admission of bribery, the toxicology report showing lethal levels of dioxin, the financial records that revealed desperation beneath their facade. The words sliced through the silence until it seemed the very walls absorbed their weight. Then Michael stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his voice did not falter as he described the leather-bound journal hidden in the attic. The prosecutor displayed it on the screen. Lines of careful handwriting filled the room. culminating in a single chilling phrase. Mission accomplished. We can begin again. The air collapsed into silence. My father bowed his head, color draining from his face. My mother's eyes emptied, her painted composure stripped bare. For the first time in my life, they had no words. 3 weeks of testimony had carved me raw, each day stretching longer than the last. Yet when the jury filed back in, time seemed to collapse into a single, suffocating moment. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. The gallery hushed to the point that the shuffling of papers sounded like thunder. I studied the faces of the 12 jurors, searching for a hint of what they carried in their deliberations. The clerk rose, voice steady but heavy with the weight of what was about to be spoken. Harold Graves. Guilty. Accomplice to first-degree murder. Financial fraud. Obstruction of justice. The words cut through the stillness like a bell tolling. My father, once the immovable figure of authority in our home, flinched. His shoulders sagged as if a lifetime of arrogance had drained out of him all at once. The clerk continued. Beatrice Graves, guilty, principal in first-degree murder. A murmur swelled, then died in the room's restrained gravity. The judge leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. My mother exploded from her chair, her composure shattering at last. You destroyed this family, Antoinette! She screamed, the polished veneer of years peeling away to reveal nothing but venom. I did not rise to meet her rage. I held my ground, spine rigid, voice calm but unyielding. No, you destroyed it when you chose greed over love. The silence that followed was heavier than her outburst, echoing longer than her words. The bailiffs moved in. Chains clinked as they led my parents away, their figures shrinking into something smaller, less terrifying, almost pitiful. I watched without triumph, only the hollow ache of justice fulfilled. There was no undoing what had been done. When it was over, the court appointed Michael and me the sole heirs. The estate was sprawling, properties, bank accounts, investments. For a moment, the enormity of it pressed on us both. We had inherited the empire built on lies, soaked in the blood of the man who once told me never to let our family's honor die. But keeping it would have meant carrying the stain forward. So we chose differently, together. Michael and I signed the documents that redirected every cent into a foundation. The Graves Trust would no longer serve as a monument to deceit, but as a lifeline for veterans sleeping under bridges, for survivors of homes that mirrored the cruelty we had known. We had turned their fortune into something unrecognizable to them, a legacy of justice. Out of the wreckage of betrayal, we had built something that might finally matter. The park smelled faintly of pine and cold stone, the kind of scent that clings to autumn evenings in Colorado. Around us, the Veterans Memorial spread out like a quiet sea of names. Each slab of granite held a story, and in the dying light of the sun, they shimmered like constellations just beginning to rise. Michael and I sat side by side on a bench scarred by years of weather, our coats brushing, our breaths fogging in the cooling air. There were no parents to impress now, no tense dinners filled with brittle smiles, no shadow of that old house pressing down on us. The empire built on lies had crumbled. The voices that once told us who we were had been silenced. All that remained was the two of us, no longer roles in someone else's pageant, but survivors learning how to live on our own terms. Michael's voice cracked the silence, soft but steady. We've lost so much, he murmured, eyes still on the names etched in stone. But at least now I know the truth. The look he gave me carried regret and something like relief. I reached over and closed my fingers around his, not out of sympathy, but recognition. For the first time, the word family felt like a choice, not a cage. I tilted my head back, seeing not just the sky, but the image of a man kneeling in his garden, soil under his nails. My grandfather's presence felt close, as if the words he once whispered had taken root inside me all along. I spoke softly, almost to the wind. They thought they could bury me, but they didn't know. I'm the seed, and I grew out of the dark. The sun dipped lower, pouring gold across the granite, gilding every name, every scar in the stone. In that light, the years of pain felt distant, like a storm past. The courtroom, the secrets, the betrayals, all of it receded into the shadows. What lay before us was not revenge, but a beginning we had chosen, born from everything we had endured, reaching upward towards something clean and alive. In that quiet glow, with Michael's hand in mine, the war was over. There was no darkness left, only the certainty of growth and the start of a new life.